after we have learned about the critical point, breaking down the deliverables, now we will see the next pointer. And before moving to the next point, that is identifying dependencies, I want to analyze, do you identify dependencies and constraints in your project before planning? What are the constraints? Everything is not perfect. Like if we take a project, for example, we take a framework, new framework building ERP projects, right? So which is a complex one. ERP itself is huge, so we can't say that it will turn out to be perfect. It is not practical to think like that. So in those projects, you might have certain constraint. For example, there might be certain limit where for the new technology to handle the users. So there could be n number of constraints. And on the people front, on the resources front, you may have mentor the team for in the new technology. That could be another constraint. So every project, some constraints of the projects, trust me, they are like that we have to just accept it. We can't have solution for it. For example, the client's VPN for the user testing. So all these things comes under the constraints of a project. So first of all, a very critical, whenever expert project manager gets a project, what they do is they identify the constraints and dependencies in the project. So it's very, very important to identify the constraints and dependency of the project. So when we talk about identifying dependencies, it's very critical that we should know every project. Again, it is different, because when we talk about one project, it is totally different from the other. So it might be a small project or a large project. The constraints and dependency identification is different for different projects. So when we talk about an expert project manager, it's very critical to know an expert project manager knows what to identify the dependency, and they are very practical. Which one we can accept and which one, if it needs a prioritization, it has to be fixed immediately. Now we move on to the next, studying in detail about identifying the dependencies. First is you need to find out true dependencies, because it could happen that some projects, for example, we are talking about the website project. So it could happen that you are nowadays the projects are very complex. We are handling one part, but due to certain conditions for the cost basis or for the budgeting, the client can give the content part to the another person or another vendor. So since they don't want to give the whole chunk to you, so it can happen. So there could be a dependency that, see, for website the content is important, so certain crucial contents could be given to other vendor. So it's very important to know what are the true dependencies and how it can impact your project. So identifying the true dependency is the first step for the expert project management. So it could be which deliverables depend on other and also in a project, identifying dependency is one is the external dependencies, like for example the other vendor or the third party you are dependent on. In some cases, the project organization, they depend on metrics kind of systems. For example, I was handling a project which was an insurance project, IT project, and it was a huge project for 50, of consisting of 50 to 100 members. But the main part of the project, the core team, actually it was a product, insurance product. It was being built by some other team sitting in some other location, geographical location. So we are definitely dependent on them on fixing certain patches. Yeah, the interfaces and the customization was done by my team, but still, since if there is anything to be changed in the core logic, we were dependent on the core team. So but the core team was loaded with other clients work, so it could happen that they get back to you in 4 days, 5 days, so it happens. So the finding out the true dependency whenever you work in such kind of project, it's very important that you need to have contacts so that you can get the things done very quickly. So all these things happen. Since many of us start out doing projects in which simultaneously project manage and do all the work, we need to do all the work. Initially, it also depends on certain projects. We are alone. We don't have, when we are building a project from the project team from the scratch, we are alone. And sometimes due to the cost issues of the project, you're not being given the team. In such cases, it's important that we need to identify when you were alone handling or you have a small team, you need to definitely start analyzing the dependency. It is easy why the project fails or the project managers fail, because in such situation it is easy to assume that there is no dependency and everything will happen sequentially. Initially, I have done the similar mistake when I was a project manager. For the first time, I used to think, yes, everything will happen sequentially, like as traditional SDLC. That is, first you will have a requirement gathering, then you will have a coding, and it will fall in place. But trust me, it doesn't happen. So as a project manager, as an expert project manager, the knack, the whole skill goes in that how you identify the dependency. For example, one dependency that I have handled in my project was resource dependency. It, we can say that it is the most common in all the domain, whether you are working in FMCG, whether you are working in manufacturing domain, whether you are working in IT domain. It's very easy. Yeah, it is more or less we are very much dependent on the resources to get the work done. But when the project runs for years, the dependency on the resources gets increased.